Hello, Kevin DeMackey here, and today we're going to talk about how to find information for a strategic landscape assessment. When you're writing a landscape assessment, it can be tricky or difficult sometimes to figure out where to begin. Where do I find information? Where do I look? What kind of information do I collect? Now, a lot of this is going to go back to your project objectives and what you've set out to do, the kinds of questions or business questions that you've set out to answer. But generally speaking, there are some areas, some general buckets of information that we often want to be looking for when it comes to our landscape assessments. So today I'm going to walk you through those areas. There is a common model out there for where to look when you do a typical landscape assessment. It's called the 6 C's. You may have heard of it or used it, or you can probably find more information about it just generally on the internet. For reference, I'm going to put in the description below what the 6 C's are. I'm not going to go through those today. I like to use a framework that's a little bit more specific than the 6 C's, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. All right, so the major buckets of things, or check boxes if you will, that I like to use when I'm thinking through what to include in a landscape assessment or what to go look for in terms of information, are the buckets you see here down the left-hand side. So those are challenge and background information, brand health information or brand strategy, consumer insights or customer insights if you're in a B2B space, category information, competition, customer or channel. Those are some of the C's that you might find in a typical 6C analysis, and then also trends and then technologies and capabilities. So I like to use these 8. It's a little bit more specific than some of the other models that you might find out there, but I find it's very helpful in making sure we think through all of the things that could be useful when we're doing an exercise like this. So let's go through each one. First, we have the challenge or background information. This is going to be a little bit more high level in terms of the kinds of information versus maybe what else might be in the landscape or what else might be included in your search. You're going to look at things like company strategy, business or brand strategy, the goals for the business or for the brand, the vision of where the brand's going, and then along with that, the challenges or business problems that stand in the way, and in particular, the key issues, problems, or questions related to your challenge at hand. So you do want to uncover all those kinds of information. Those are example inputs of things you might look for. Profit and loss statements, financial information, those things are sometimes good to look at as well. In all of these cases, I'm giving you example inputs, example types of information that might fall into these. There might be more than what I'm showing you here. You may not need everything that's on this list. It's really meant to illustrate some examples of the kinds of things that might fall into each category. Now, based on that, you're going to have example sources here in the last column. So these are the actual places you would go look for this kind of information. Where would be a good starting point to go and to look for some of these things? So in the case of challenge and background information and some of the data points that I've just mentioned, you would be looking in things like corporate plans or business unit strategies, brand strategies for that kind of information. You might do interviews, stakeholder interviews with senior stakeholders or project or cross-functional stakeholders, or you might look at previous project plans, previous project reports or materials that were created in related projects that occurred previously. So that's challenge and background. The second one on this list here is brand health. So when we're talking about brand health, we're sort of assessing the status of the brand in the marketplace and in the minds of consumers. So it's going to include information like, do we have profile and positioning strategy or statements, architecture, just brand strategy information in general. You want to see if that's well defined and what that looks like, if it's a strong strategy or not. Then you also may look at data points like brand awareness, perceptions or equities that the brand may have in the marketplace. You might look at some of the sales data, including penetration, buy rate, loyalty. All of these give you indications as to how is the brand doing, what's the health of the brand, and what are the strengths and weaknesses. In order to find these key pieces of information, you might look at sources like brand tools, foundational tool documents, that may be where you find the brand strategy material, but you'll also want to look at research studies. So in the case of brand awareness, brand perceptions and equities, those can be done via research studies. They may have already been done. There are many companies out there that do studies like that. Or you may look at panel data to get things like penetration, loyalty, and buy rate. So whether it's household panel data is probably a very common one. So companies like Nielsen or Numerator would be able to offer those services. Okay, the third bucket on our list here is consumer insights. This would also be customer insights if you're in a B2B space, but we're going to be looking at things like profiling. So demographics and psychographics are very relevant right out of the gate, profiling the consumer or the customer. Then you're also going to want to understand tensions or problems the consumer faces, drivers in the category, need states in the category, occasions, those kinds of things. So you want to uncover all those insights, and depending on the challenge or business question your landscape is answering, these could be very relevant. The places you would look obviously are going to be in consumer research, so qualitative or quantitative studies, segmentations, or even secondary research that maybe other companies have done or that you're securing from outside the organization. All right, the fourth one on our list here is category information. That's going to be more high level. So you're going to be looking for things like understanding the size of the category, the segments within the category, what is the penetration of the category, is there seasonality to the category, to the way the sales curves look, geography, are there geographic things that need to be understood, geographic implications or nuances to the category. And those kinds of information, those pieces of information are going to come from places like customer point of sale data or scanner data, if you can get access to it. Sometimes that can be shared with a brand. Nielsen and IRI, Euromonitor, those are pretty typical examples of data sources, POS sources, where you can get data like that. And as well as store walks. Don't forget the easy things to do. It's very easy to go walk stores and get a sense of what's going on in the category. Competition is next on our list. It's similar to category, but now we're drilling sort of one level down and we're looking specifically at the competitive aspect. So we're going to want to understand the brands in the category that are competing against each other or competing with our brand. What do those portfolios look like? What are the market shares, the growth rates, who's growing, who's winning, who's losing? What's the innovation that's happening from the competition? Who's innovating at what pace? What are the kinds of things that they're creating? Advertising is also another good one. So whether it's actual television and radio and more traditional advertising, or even simple things like websites and trade materials. So that is going to be the competitive space. Those are the data inputs. And so example sources we may get this. Again, we may be doing retail audits as an easy way to get information, but we also may have advertising tracking data. So you can subscribe to services where the ads are tracked and you can get an understanding of how are competitors advertising, in what channels, what's the actual creative, what are they saying, how much are they spending. And then consumption data, similar to category and some of these other places where we're using consumption data, point of sale data, that data is also relevant here. Okay, next on the list is customer or channel. It's actually a little bit of both, customer and channel. And so we're looking at things like, so if we're a traditional CPG brand, for example, and we're selling through customers or through distributors, then we want to understand what's happening from that aspect. So competitive distribution, where are our competitors selling? Where do they have distribution or not have distribution? We want to look at the same thing for our brand. What are the strengths from a distribution standpoint? Who are our strongest and best customers and channels? And then where are the gaps, both at a brand level and at an individual product level or pillar level in the portfolio? We also want to understand things like margins and shares across those. So these are examples of the kinds of data that you might be looking for. And you might find those in strategic documents. You also may go to supply chain or supply chain documents or analyses to help understand strengths and weaknesses here. And then obviously the same consumption data that's useful in some of these other buckets is also used for here. In addition, shipment data is very important. If you have your own shipment data that you can analyze and answer some of these questions. All right, 2 to go. The next to last one here is trends. Now, trends is interesting because it sort of encompasses a lot of what we've done so far. But the reason I like to specifically call this out as its own bucket is because it forces us to think about not just what is true now or what is happening now or what has happened in the past, but what are the patterns over time and are things changing going forward into the future. So now we're looking over long time periods and we're looking for changes over time. So whether you want to think of it as its own bucket or layer this question onto each of the other buckets, you need to make sure that that's something that you consider. So I like to call it out as its own category of information to secure. So again, we're looking for shifts over time in the data and information trends over time, we are looking at things like innovations that are happening, changes in the category, demographic changes, cultural changes, or regulatory changes. Those all may be applicable here as well. So we're looking macro environment as well as at our own company and at the category. In order to secure data like that, chances are, if it's not within the data you've already secured here, you're going to have to go maybe outside of your company to get additional information or to supplement your landscape. So you can look at things like secondary reports, industry publications, articles. You're going to have to get out there and start looking. Last but not least, technology and capabilities. So here we're going to look at our core strengths, our core technologies that we use in our products and services, and we're also going to be able to compare that hopefully to what's going on with competitors and their core technologies. We want to be looking at things like what are cost of entry versus what are differentiating technologies, what do we have access to or not have access to, and what might be coming in the future technically that we could have access to. So in order to get that, we're probably going to want to talk to our research and development departments, our supply chain, go on factory tours, understand your own supply chain and how products are made, take pictures, take notes, ask lots of questions, and interview people and get a deeper understanding here. And you can also enlist your cross-functional partners for help with something like this. So enlist your R&D team to help uncover information that might help you in this section. All right, that was a lot. I know I put a lot on the board here. So those are 8 buckets I like to use as a mental checklist or even a literal checklist to go through. Use that when you're creating your landscape assessment or collecting information for your landscape assessment, and consider them as options, things that you could collect. You don't have to collect everything on this list. There may be things you need that aren't on this list. I think the real point here is to give you a starting point of some things that you can think through, some options and a starting point, so you can determine for yourself or for the landscape that you're writing what's important and maybe some things to use. One other thing I'll do, since this is a lot of information, I am going to go ahead and put together this into a checklist, and we'll link it down in the description below so that you can get a cheat sheet of the kinds of things that you're seeing on the board here, and I'll even add a little bit more than what I could fit here so that you can take it away and use it. So check the description below for a link to get that checklist. If you found this video helpful, go ahead and hit the like button. If you'd like to see more videos like this in the future, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and that way you'll find out when we publish new videos. I am going to go ahead and continue this series in our next video, where we'll start to get a little bit more into what to do with all the information you find. So once you've used our tips that we've given you today to determine what to find and go get that information, we'll talk a little bit more next time about then what to do with it. Thanks, and we'll see you then.